The podcast you are about to listen to is centered on a book titled Divine Wisdom: Key to Mental and Intellectual Excellence by Pastor Jonah Okwudiri Jacob. Pastor Jonah is both the author and owner of the book titled Divine Wisdom. For inquiries on how to get the hard copy, audio or PDF version of the book, kindly contact Impact Media through the informations at the end of this video. God bless you in Jesus' mighty name.
So, and imagine it's 1923.
Right.
And 9 of the most, powerful, brilliant, arguably most successful men on the face of the earth, they all meet up at the Edgewater Beach Hotel in Chicago.
Oh, wow. Right.
Yeah, and if you were, looking at this group from the outside, you would absolutely say these men had completely mastered the game of life. Like, they had the ultimate cheat codes.
These were the titans.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You had the president of the largest independent steel company, the greatest wheat speculator on earth, the president of the New York Stock Exchange, a member of the president's cabinet. I mean, he had infinite data, elite strategies, and just more wealth than they could ever spend in a lifetime.
Right. The absolute peak of earthly success.
Right. But, okay, fast forward 25 years. Just 25. 3 of those men had taken their own lives.
Jeez.
2 were utterly bankrupt. 1 was literally insane.
Yeah.
And 2 had gone to federal prison.
That is just, it's a catastrophic collapse. Mind-bending, really.
It is. And, it forces you to ask this really, really uncomfortable question. What invisible trap did they all fall into? Like, what if the very wisdom they used to build those massive empires was actually, the exact thing that destroyed them?
It's one of the most fascinating paradoxes of human history, honestly. And we see it, repeated in every single generation.
Totally.
Because we are culturally conditioned to view wisdom and intelligence as these universally positive, totally objective metrics. We think of wisdom kind of like raw processing power in a computer, right?
Right. Like, if you have a lot of it, you automatically win.
Exactly. If you have it, you win. If you don't, you lose. We equate it with strategic cunning or the ability to accumulate capital, the capacity to just outmaneuver your competitors. But what we almost never stop to actually ask is, where is that wisdom actually coming from?
Yeah, it's the source code.
Yes. What is the source code? Because we look at the immediate, tangible results, like the mansion, the IPO, the political power, and we just sort of assume, oh, the foundation underneath it all must be completely solid.
Yeah. And that is exactly the mission of our deep dive today. We are looking at some incredibly thought-provoking and honestly pretty challenging excerpts from a text by Pastor Jonah Okwudiri Jacob.
It's a heavy one.
It really is. It's titled The Vanity and Corruption of Earthly Wisdom. And we're zeroing in on a really specific section called Divine Wisdom: Key to Mental and Intellectual Excellence.
Which is such a provocative title.
Right. And the core argument here, it's going to challenge literally everything you think you know about being quote-unquote smart, about being successful, and honestly about the advice you follow on a daily basis.
Yeah.
The author is making this really intense case that the source of your wisdom, the actual wellspring or operating system it comes from, is vastly more important than the wisdom itself.
Absolutely. And, before we really get into the weeds of this, and we will get into the weeds, I think it is crucial to set a framework for how we are going to approach this material today.
Good idea.
Because this text is explicitly theological, right?
Yeah.
It relies heavily on Christian scripture to construct its arguments and its whole worldview.
Right.
But for the purpose of our deep dive here, we are going to impartially examine the author's philosophical framework. We want to deeply understand the specific worldview as a diagnostic tool.
I love that. A diagnostic tool.
Yeah.
Right, because honestly, whether you are a CEO leading a massive boardroom or managing a nonprofit, or literally just a parent trying to raise a family and, keep your household from descending into absolute chaos.
Which is a full-time job in itself.
Oh, tell me about it. But this text, it forces you to audit the source of the advice you rely on. Because if your operating system is corrupted, well, every single decision you make is going to be tainted.
Exactly.
So let's just dive right into the blueprint of this so-called earthly wisdom. The author grounds his entire diagnostic tool in the book of James. And since we really want to unpack the mechanisms here, let's actually read and explain the specific scriptures he uses.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so I have James chapter 3 pulled up here, verses 14 through 16. I'll read the first part, and maybe you can finish it out.
That sounds great.
Okay, so James 3.14 says, "But if ye have bitter envying and strife in your hearts, glory not, and lie not against the truth.
Right. And then it continues in verses 15 and 16. This wisdom descendeth not from above, but is earthly, sensual, devilish. For where envying and strife is, there is confusion and every evil work.
Okay, wow. And I should note, the author also explicitly points out that this passage is like a direct contrast to James 1.17, which talks about a completely different kind of wisdom, one that descends from above.
Yes.
But before we even get to the from above part, we really need to dissect this earthly blueprint, because the phrasing here is just so surgically precise, bitter envying and strife. Let's explain the text itself. Like, what is the author actually diagnosing here?
Well, the text is essentially providing us with a diagnostic test that is based entirely on the fruit or, the output of the wisdom you were using.
The output.
Right. It's like testing a piece of software to see what kind of errors it throws. So if the wisdom operating in your life produces bitter envying, and we're not just talking about casually wanting what someone else has, right? We're talking about a deep, resentful, toxic jealousy that literally eats at you. And if it produces strife, which is constant conflict, friction, this ruthless, self-seeking ambition, then the text is actually very clear.
What does it say?
It says you shouldn't glory or boast about how smart or successful you are. In fact, it says doing so is actively lying against the truth.
Lying against the truth.
Yeah.
Because the outward success is basically just masking this internal rot.
Exactly. The core explanation here is that this specific type of wisdom, no matter how incredibly effective it might seem at getting results in the short term, it does not originate from a divine source. It doesn't come from above.
Right.
Instead, the author categorizes it using 3 very specific, very heavy adjectives: earthly, sensual, and devilish. And the ultimate result of this triad, according to the text, is confusion and every evil work.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this is where the author makes a major claim. According to the text, earthly wisdom is fundamentally soulish. He says it's rooted in the mundane reasoning of ordinary man, under the influence of something much darker. But I gotta stop right there. If this wisdom is just mundane reasoning, what exactly does he mean by that? Does the author mean that everyday common sense is inherently evil?
It's a great question.
Like if I look both ways before crossing the street, or I don't know, if I negotiate a better interest rate on my mortgage, is that earthly, devilish wisdom? Is there a specific distinction here between just normal human intelligence and this soulish wisdom?
Yeah, that is the pivotal question, actually. And it's where people very often misinterpret this kind of theological philosophy.
Because it sounds anti-intellectual at first glance.
Right, exactly. But what's fascinating here is that the author is absolutely not attacking the basic cognitive functions of humanity. He's not saying that intellect or logic or basic survival instincts are somehow bad.
Okay, good to know.
He is attacking the source code of a specific value system. So when he uses the term soulish, or refers to mundane reasoning, he is pointing to a framework of logic that is entirely disconnected from any divine intent or moral absolute.
Disconnected. Got it.
Right. It is reasoning that relies solely on the self. It prioritizes self-preservation, self-elevation, self-gratification over literally any higher moral, ethical, or divine order.
Oh, okay. So it's not about the capacity to think. It's about the ultimate allegiance of that thinking.
Precisely. It's not about whether you know how to balance a checkbook or engineer a suspension bridge. It's about the underlying motivation that drives why you are accumulating the wealth in that checkbook, or, who you are exploiting to build that bridge.
Wow.
The soulish realm, at least in this theological context, that refers to the mind, the will, and the emotions operating completely independently of the spirit. It's basically human intellect functioning as its own god.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's not the plumbing, it's the water.
Exactly.
Like, think about it like a major city's water supply. You could build a house and install the most beautifully engineered, state-of-the-art copper plumbing system in the entire world. The pipes are just flawless, the water pressure is fully optimized.
Right, a perfect system.
Yeah. And that plumbing represents human intellect, right? Our incredible ability to strategize, to plan, to execute really complex tasks. But if the reservoir, like the actual source of the water feeding into that house, is tainted with heavy metals and bacteria and toxins, well, it absolutely does not matter how beautiful your pipes are.
I'm one bit.
The water coming out of the tap is still going to poison you. So the author is saying that earthly wisdom is a tainted reservoir. You might be an absolute genius, but if your genius is drawing from this specific source, the output is toxic.
That is a brilliant analogy. I mean, really, the text argues that because the source is tainted, because it is fundamentally disconnected from the divine, the output is inevitably going to manifest as the envying and strife that James mentions. The machinery works perfectly, but it produces poison.
Yeah. Now let's bring that into modern application, because honestly, you don't have to look very hard to see this bitter envying and strife playing out literally everywhere.
Oh, it's everywhere.
Look at modern family dynamics, for example. You see families absolutely tearing themselves apart over keeping up with the Joneses. It's not just like a casual desire for a nice house.
Right, it becomes an obsession.
Exactly. It's a bitter envy that your neighbor has a nicer house, or that your siblings' kids got into a better, more expensive private school. And what happens? That earthly reasoning like, I need status to be validated, it produces strife.
Immense strife.
It leads to massive consumer debt, spouses fighting over money at 2 a.m., parents putting crushing, unbearable pressure on their kids to perform. The wisdom was, let's project success so we are respected. But the fruit is a household full of confusion and fractured relationships.
And you see it perhaps even more clearly and destructively in corporate culture.
Oh, absolutely.
Think about a highly competitive, high-stakes sales environment, or, one of these notorious toxic tech startups that we always read about in the news.
Yeah, the ones with the ping pong tables, but everyone is crying in the bathroom.
Exactly. The prevailing wisdom from management might be that you have to step on your colleagues to get the promotion. The strategy is to hoard information, right? To take credit for other people's work, to actively undermine the competing team so your specific division looks better to the board.
It is so common.
It is ruthless, cutthroat ambition. It is purely soulish and mundane reasoning. And what does it actually produce?
Exactly what the scripture says.
Yeah.
Confusion and every evil work.
Exactly. You get insanely high employee turnover, massive burnout, corporate sabotage, whistleblowers, and ultimately a completely fractured, paranoid company culture.
Yeah.
The wisdom seemed incredibly smart on paper, right? Eliminate the internal competition to maximize personal gain.
Right.
But the source was earthly and sensual, driven entirely by ego, and so the system inevitably cannibalizes itself.
It's the philosophy of survival of the fittest, just applied to the boardroom, which honestly actually brings up a massive fundamental question. Well, if this earthly wisdom is so incredibly corrupt and is producing all this toxicity, debt, and corporate burnout, didn't God create the earth? Because the text explicitly acknowledges God as the creator. So how did the custodian of this earthly wisdom, as the author calls humanity, become so fundamentally flawed? Like, if the reservoir is tainted, who dumped the toxins in the water?
That is the logical next step. Yeah, and the author addresses this origin story directly. He takes us all the way back to Genesis to explain the transition from divine dominion to earthly dethronement.
Okay, Genesis.
He sets up a stark contrast between two entirely different eras of human existence. Let's look at the scriptures he pairs together here. First, he points to Genesis chapter 1. I'll read verses 26 through 28 and then verse 30.
For it.
And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth and subdue it." And it was so.
Beautiful.
And the author makes sure to point out that in verse 31, God looked at everything he had made and declared it very good.
Okay, so that establishes the baseline. That is the original uncorrupted operating system.
Yeah.
The earth was created, man was given dominion, which means like stewardship and authority. And the framework was, by definition, divine and good. There was no tainted reservoir yet.
Exactly. But then the author juxtaposes that original design with Genesis chapter 6, verses 5 through 7 to show the horrific contrast after the fall. Why don't you read that one?
I have it right here. Let's see. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth.
Just think about the sheer magnitude of that shift.
It is a staggering, honestly, almost incomprehensible contrast.
It really is.
I mean, we go from a world where everything was very good and humanity operated in perfect dominion to a reality where, quote, every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. So within the framework of this text, How does the author explain this catastrophic shift? Like, how do we actually get from point A to point B?
The author explains this through a very specific legal and theological framework. He argues that while God is the creator and the ultimate owner of the world, God is not directly responsible for the current corrupt system that's operating within it. And the reason for this is delegation. God gave the right of charge, the dominion, to humanity, specifically to Adam. The turning point, the moment the toxins were dumped into the reservoir, to use your analogy, is when Adam committed what the author literally calls high treason.
High treason. Wow, that is a very heavy, deliberate legal phrase.
It is.
Because when we think of treason in a modern context, it implies betrayal of a sovereign nation, right? A deliberate handing over of state secrets or authority to an enemy power. It's not just a mistake or a misdemeanor, it's a fundamental betrayal of allegiance.
And that is precisely how the text frames it. The author argues that this act of high treason eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil was humanity's dethronement.
Dethronement?
Yeah. By choosing that tree, humanity essentially rejected the divine operating system. They basically said, we don't want to rely on the source code from above. We want to generate our own wisdom. We want to be self-contained.
We want to do it ourselves.
Exactly. And this action didn't just affect humanity on a psychological level. The author states it actually altered the fabric of reality itself. He says it brought the entire cosmic order under a strong magnetic pull of evil.
A magnetic pull of evil. That implies it's almost like a corrupted law of physics.
That's exactly it. Just like gravity pulls things downward, this earthly wisdom exerts a constant, inescapable downward pull on all human endeavors. The earthly wisdom we see today, the envy, the strife, the cutthroat corporate tactics we were talking about, is, as the author calls it, the progeny or the direct offspring of that tree of knowledge of good and evil.
So let me make sure I'm really wrapping my head around the scale of this claim.
Go for it.
If humanity essentially handed over the keys through this act of high treason and subjected the entire world to this magnetic pull, does the author suggest that literally every secular system today defaults to this corrupted operating system?
Yes.
Like, if a system or a philosophy isn't actively, deliberately rooted in the divine, is it just automatically infected with this malware?
Yes, that is the unavoidable conclusion of the author's premise. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the author is positing that there is no such thing as neutral ground.
No neutral ground.
None. Because the cosmic order itself was subjected to this magnetic pull of evil. Any system, any philosophy, any business framework that is born solely from this earth without a direct connection back to the divine source is inherently flawed at its root.
Wow.
It might look incredibly sophisticated. It might be a Fortune 500 company. It might be super effective in the short term, yielding massive profits. But its foundational DNA is corrupted. It is running on malware.
Think about how massive and frankly terrifying that is for leadership or management today.
It's sobering.
Let's say you're leading a team, or even better, let's say you're running a ministry, a charity, or a nonprofit that is theoretically supposed to be doing profound moral good in the world.
Right, a noble cause.
But to run this organization, you are relying entirely on secular management tactics. You use cutthroat performance reviews to weed out the weak. You manipulate your donors through fear-based marketing. You prioritize PR and optics over internal ethics.
Which happens all the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
The text is saying you are using earthly wisdom.
Yeah.
You might have a Christian logo on your building or a charitable mission statement. But if your management style is borrowed from a ruthless Wall Street firm that prioritizes profit over people, you are relying on an inherently corrupted framework.
Absolutely.
You are operating completely independently of the divine design, and you will eventually reap the confusion and evil work that James talked about.
It's the difference between trying to build a skyscraper using a laser level calibrated to true north versus trying to build it by just eyeballing it while looking in a funhouse mirror.
A funhouse mirror. That is so good.
The earthly system, according to the author, is that funhouse mirror. It completely distorts reality. It makes a crooked foundation look perfectly straight, right up until the building collapses. And this brings us perfectly into the next phase of the author's argument, which is how this funhouse mirror distortion manifests on a macro level, specifically in human intellect, academia, and philosophy.
Right, because if the foundation is cracked, the ivory tower built on top of it is going to have some serious structural issues.
To say the least.
The malware doesn't just affect our emotions, it infects our intellect. So let's look at the next set of scriptures the author uses to highlight this intellectual trap. we're looking at Psalm 82.5 and 1 John 5.19. I have the psalm right here. It says, "They know not, neither will they understand. They walk on in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are out of course."
And 1 John 5.19 says, "And we know that we are of God, and the whole world lieth in wickedness."
Let's explain this imagery before we really dive into the author's specific critique of academia and science. What does it actually mean to walk on in darkness while the foundations are out of course? How does that translate to intellectual pursuits?
The imagery here is incredibly evocative, and it speaks directly to the limitations of earthly wisdom. Walking in darkness implies a total lack of true vision, context, or direction.
Like you're blindfolded.
Exactly. You might be moving incredibly fast, you might be making huge technological advancements, writing prolific, peer-reviewed papers, gathering terabytes of data, but you have no idea where you are actually going.
Oh, wow.
You are blind to the ultimate purpose or the hazards right in front of you. And the phrase, "foundations of the earth are out of course," really reinforces this idea of systemic instability. A foundation that is out of course means the very bedrock of reality, the moral and philosophical grounding of the society, is misaligned.
So it's like a train moving at 200 miles an hour, but the tracks are built over a sinkhole.
Exactly. The text is explaining that intellectuals are operating with great confidence, moving very rapidly, but they are doing so in a reality that is fundamentally skewed and entirely blind to absolute divine truth.
And this is where the author takes a really sharp, controversial turn into critiquing what he calls carnal intellectualism.
He does not hold back.
No, he doesn't. He posits that earthly wisdom is the engine driving this. And he specifically calls out Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. He argues that evolutionary theory was propelled by this earthly wisdom as a direct, deliberate negation of biblical creation.
Right.
He frames it not just as a scientific theory attempting to explain biology, but as an intellectual manifestation of that original treason in Eden-like, an attempt to explain the existence of the universe entirely without acknowledging the creator.
Yes, he views it as the ultimate attempt to create a self-contained earthly operating system. And he doesn't stop at evolutionary theory. He takes aim at the entire discipline of secular philosophy.
Oh, yeah.
He quotes a lecturer who candidly admitted that the whole essence of philosophy is just the debate, or the argument itself. The author paints a picture of carnal intellectuals who just continue to argue, theorize, and debate until they, as he puts it, argue themselves out of existence.
The quote he uses here is absolutely wild. It's so vivid. He compares philosophy to a blind man searching for a black goat in a dark room.
It's devastating.
I mean, as an analogy, that is just brutal. You have a person who cannot see looking for an animal that perfectly blends into the environment inside a room completely devoid of light. It's the ultimate exercise in futility.
It vividly illustrates his view of the fundamental limitation of earthly wisdom. It's a closed loop of human reasoning.
Right, it just loops.
It can never actually arrive at absolute truth because it lacks the external light, the divine revelation necessary to see the goat, so to speak. It relies on the senses, but the senses are operating in the dark.
Okay, I have to push back here.
Sure.
Because I can hear the listener reacting to this, and honestly, I'm reacting to it too. Is the author fundamentally anti-intellectual? Like, is the message here that we're supposed to just stop asking questions, burn our degrees, shut down our universities, and never debate complex topics?
It can definitely sound that way.
Yeah, because that sounds dangerously close to just advocating for willful, dogmatic ignorance. If any attempt to understand the world through science or philosophy is carnal, how do we even function in society?
This raises a very, very important question, and it's a critical distinction we absolutely have to make to understand his framework. If we look closely at the text, the critique isn't against learning, education, or intelligence itself.
Okay.
What's fascinating here is that the author is critiquing an intellectualism that circles endlessly in arguments without ever arriving at truth.
Oh, I see.
He is attacking the arrogance of an intellect that believes it is sufficient unto itself.
Okay, so it's not the capacity to reason, it's the refusal to anchor that reason.
Exactly. The problem isn't the capacity to think, it's the refusal to anchor that thinking to a divine foundation. It's the difference between exploring a massive, complex house with a really powerful flashlight versus stumbling around in the pitch black and claiming that the act of stumbling is the discovery. He's saying that without divine wisdom, academia often glorifies the stumbling.
Okay, I see the distinction. It's not the intellect, it's the carnal intellect. The intellect deliberately disconnected from the divine OS. And honestly, think about how perfectly this maps onto our culture today. Look at the endless online discourse.
Oh, it's exhausting.
You can go on social media, Twitter, Reddit, YouTube comment sections, and literally watch incredibly intelligent people argue endlessly in these massive echo chambers. They write thousands of words, cite peer-reviewed statistics, employ complex logical fallacies, and at the end of the day, no one's mind has changed, no actual truth is agreed upon, and everyone just leaves angrier, more anxious, and more divided than when they start.
It's just a vortex.
It is the literal definition of the essence being just the debate. The foundation is out, of course, so all the intellectual horsepower just generates heat, not light.
That is so well said. And you see this exact same paralysis in the corporate world, too. We even have a specific term for it, analysis paralysis.
Oh, yeah.
You can have a team of brilliant data analysts with infinite amounts of market research, running endless predictive models. But because the company lacks a foundational moral compass, because their foundations are out of course regarding what their actual purpose is beyond just making money, they can never actually make a clear ethical decision.
They just spin their wheels.
Right. They have all the earthly wisdom, all the data points, all the spreadsheets, but they are walking in darkness regarding actual truth. They debate the metrics until the company simply stagnates.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
Yeah.
Living in that space completely drains you, which actually transitions us perfectly from the macro level of academia, philosophy, and corporate strategy to the micro level of the individual human being.
Right, how it affects us.
Yeah, because if earthly wisdom creates these massive intellectual dead ends on a societal scale, how does it trap you and me on a personal level? The author moves here from the earthly aspect of James 3 to the sensual aspect.
Yes, the author breaks down the sensual trap into 3 very distinct categories of people who are governed by it. Now, it's important to define sensual in this context before we get into them.
Good point.
Because it doesn't just mean physical pleasure or intimacy. It means that this wisdom appeals directly to our senses, our emotions, and our intellect in a way that is specifically designed to inflate our ego.
Okay.
It's about self-gratification, self-aggrandizement, and perception. So the first category he identifies under this sensual trap is the intellectual class.
Right. And his description of this class is honestly brutal. He describes these as people who spend a lifetime acquiring certificates, degrees, and accolades just to feed their ego.
Just for the letters after their name.
Exactly. He says they will take deep personal offense and even sue people or ruin careers if you don't use their proper prefix like doctor, professor, bishop, apostle. And he's looking at both secular and religious leaders here. What is his psychological diagnosis of this specific group? Why are they so obsessed with the title?
He argues that their outward defense is usually very noble sounding. They'll say, give honor to whom honor is due.
Right.
But he diagnoses their real internal problem as a deep, crippling feeling of inadequacy and low self-esteem. He calls it the reflection of an unrenewed mind.
Wow.
For this class, the degrees, the titles, the corner office, these are just armor. It's armor built to protect a highly fragile ego that's being completely manipulated by earthly wisdom. They need the external validation because they have no internal divine foundation.
You know, we see this exact same behavior today, just like in a different font. Think about the modern pursuit of personal branding.
Oh, absolutely.
We build these highly curated digital avatars made out of our credentials. We stuff our LinkedIn profiles with buzzwords and titles. We obsess over our follower counts on Instagram or TikTok.
It's the modern resume.
Yeah, we curate these aesthetically perfect lives online to hide the fact that we might actually feel entirely inadequate, lonely, or just terrified of failure in real life. And if someone challenges our brand or disrespects our online status or leaves a negative comment, people go to war.
They try to cancel each other.
Exactly. It's the exact same sensual wisdom. It's the modern equivalent of suing someone over a title. The ego just absolutely demands to be fed.
And that insatiable desire for status leads right into his second category, the fame seekers.
The fame seekers.
These are the individuals who spend their entire lives trying to be known, to be in charge, to be the absolute center of gravity in any room. The author says they are ready to do anything to get to the top. They become completely power drunk.
Right.
He specifically points to sit-tight rulers and military dictators, people who will suppress others, manipulate the law, rig elections, and destroy innocent lives just to maintain their grip on fame and authority.
That is the ultimate expression of the bitter envying and strife from James 3, just manifesting as political or social tyranny. The strife literally becomes systemic oppression. And then he brings us to the third category, which I think is perhaps the most insidious and honestly the most common in our daily culture, the hedonists.
Yes. The author describes hedonists as those who believe the ultimate supreme goal in life is physical, sensual pleasure, comfort, and wealth.
Living for the weekend.
Exactly. But he points out a fatal structural flaw in this operating system. It requires immense, totally unsustainable energy to maintain such bodily activity and lifestyle. Because it is purely physical and sensual, because it relies on external inputs to generate dopamine, it just isn't self-sustaining.
He writes that because of this energy drain, they burn out at a very tender age, which paves the way for frustration and ultimately leads to seeking solace in narcotics, the asylum, or even suicide.
So very bleak.
This is intense, dark stuff. But I want to explore this concept of energy burnout. The text points out that hedonists require immense energy to maintain their lifestyle. How does that concept of energy burnout apply to everyday people? Because most of the people listening to this wouldn't necessarily call themselves wild, partying hedonists.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture of modern culture, we can see this exact sensual trap operating in what we call hustle culture.
Hustle culture, yes.
You don't have to be a rock star abusing substances in a trashed hotel room to be caught in this trap. Think about the sheer psychological and physical exhaustion of just maintaining a facade of success.
It takes so much work.
So much energy. The energy it takes to constantly project a level of wealth you don't actually have, to maintain the image of a perfect marriage on Facebook when you are struggling behind closed doors, to always be grinding and optimizing every single second of your day for maximum productivity and sensory reward.
Yeah.
It's like running a computer processor at 100% capacity all the time. Eventually the fan breaks and it overheats.
Oh, absolutely. It's the mom who is up until 2 a.m. crafting the perfect Pinterest-worthy birthday party for her toddler, not out of actual joy or love for the kid, but out of a desperate, anxious need to show the other moms on Instagram that she has it all together.
Exactly.
Or it's the middle manager who works 80 hours a week, completely sacrificing his physical health, his sleep, and his relationship with his kids, just to afford the lease on a luxury car that tells the world he's successful.
That's the sensual trap. The underlying engine driving that behavior is sensual, earthly wisdom. It's appealing entirely to the ego and the senses. And the author's point is that this engine is incredibly inefficient. It literally burns through your life force.
Wow.
It requires constant fueling by external validation. And when that validation inevitably runs dry, when the post doesn't get enough likes, when the promotion goes to someone else, or when the physical body simply cannot keep up with the crushing demands of the ego, the system crashes.
It has to crash.
The frustration sets in, the burnout happens, and the individual realizes they have spent all this energy, all this time, building something entirely hollow.
And the author notes that all of these people, the intellectuals, the fame seekers, the hedonists, they're operating a wisdom that sets them on an ego trip without the appropriate lesson of humility.
Right.
He actually quotes another scripture here, God resists the proud and gives grace to the humble. Which tells us that this earthly wisdom isn't just tiring, it's not just inefficient, it actively places you in opposition to divine grace.
And that opposition is not passive. This leads us directly into the darkest, most severe aspect of the author's diagnostic tool. We've talked about the earthly aspect, the mundane reasoning, we've talked about the sensual, the ego, and the burnout.
Yeah.
Now the author addresses the final descriptor from James 3, that this wisdom is fundamentally devilish.
Okay, here we go. We are transitioning from the personal exhaustion of just trying to look good to the actively destructive, malignant aspects of this wisdom. To ground this concept, the author uses 1 John chapter 3, verses 6 and 8.
Let's read and explain that, because this is where the text draws a very hard line in the sand.
I have it here. Let's look at it.
Okay, I'll start with verse 6. Whosoever abideth in him sinneth not. Whosoever sinneth hath not seen him, neither known him.
And verse 8 continues. He that committeth sin is of the devil, for the devil sinneth from the beginning. For this purpose the Son of God was manifested, that he might destroy the works of the devil.
Before we look at the specific list of vices the author provides, we need to understand the scriptural logic he is employing here.
Right.
The text is drawing a definitive binary. It is completely uncompromising.
Right. There's literally no gray area in this theology.
None. He is explaining that sin, which encompasses all the destructive behaviors we are about to list, is not just a casual human mistake, a psychological flaw, or a product of a bad environment.
It's deeper.
Within this framework, sin is fundamentally connected to a devilish nature. To commit these acts, to rely on these methods to get ahead, is to actively operate under the lordship and the wisdom of the devil, who sinneth from the beginning. If you are operating in these vices, you are utilizing the devilish aspect of earthly wisdom. You are running the ultimate malware.
And the list the author provides to define this is extensive and frankly brutal. He says the characteristics of this wisdom include lies, deception, hypocrisy, murder, cheating, malice, anger, hatred, abuse, both of self and others, revenge, backbiting, jealousy, pride, egoistic tendencies.
Just keeps going.
Then he even goes as far as specifically naming assassinations and cult activities. He says all of these are embedded in earthly wisdom. And he makes a really bold assertion here. Anytime you see anything that spells wickedness or evil, just know that this is the type of wisdom in operation.
The key components he highlights that truly drive this worldly system on a day-to-day basis are lies, deception, and hypocrisy.
Those are the big three.
That is the triad of how the earthly system maintains its illusion of control and success.
So I want to ask you, and really I want to ask the listener directly, because the text challenges the reader with this. Which of these tendencies is ruling your life? Now, most of us listening are hopefully not involved in assassinations, cult activities, or murder.
Hopefully not.
But what about the subtler traits on that list? What about the ones we normalize? How do things like hypocrisy or backbiting or deception actively limit our potential, as the author claims? Because in the real world, sometimes a little deception seems to actually help people get ahead.
Right, it looks like it works. But the author provides a profound metaphor to explain the mechanics of why this fails. He says earthly wisdom operates in an imaginary world of fantasy that promises a castle in the sky without an earthbound foundation.
A castle in the sky.
And what happens when you build a castle in the sky? He says it leaves you at the mercy of gravity.
Wow, at the mercy of gravity. That is an incredible image.
Yes. When you use deception, hypocrisy, or backbiting to advance your career or your social standing, you are essentially building the floor of your castle on thin air.
Because it's not real.
Exactly. It might look like you are rising. The people around you might think you are making massive progress. You might even get the corner office. But there is no structural integrity. You are living on an illusion.
It's just a hologram.
And gravity, which represents truth, reality, and divine order, will eventually assert itself. The collapse isn't a possibility, it's a mathematical certainty. The subtle traits limit your potential because they guarantee that whatever you build will eventually be destroyed by its own lack of foundation. Deception is structurally unsound.
Let's apply that to business and ministry, because this is where we see those castles in the sky collapse so publicly and spectacular.
Oh, all the time.
Think about massive corporate fraud companies like Enron, or more recently, some of these massive crypto exchanges that just evaporated.
Yeah.
A team manipulates the spreadsheets. They use deception, a key component of earthly wisdom, just to meet a quarterly goal, to secure venture capital, or to boost the stock price.
And it works for a minute.
Right. Everyone gets their massive bonuses.
Yeah.
It looks like a phenomenal success. The founders are on magazine covers. They are living in the castle in the sky, but the foundation is missing. The money isn't real, the value isn't real. And when the market turns, when the auditors finally come, when gravity hits, the entire company implodes. People go to prison. Thousands of innocent employees lose their life savings.
Or consider the heartbreaking moral failures we see in ministry or leadership. A religious leader operates with deep hypocrisy, preaching a strict standard of holiness to their congregation while secretly living a double life, driven by sensual ego and hidden vices.
Yeah.
They build massive platforms, they write best-selling books, they have millions of followers hanging on their every single word. But the foundation of their entire ministry is built on lies.
And air.
When the truth finally comes out, the fall is catastrophic, and the collateral damage to their followers' faith is immense. The author says you think you are succeeding when you use these methods, but you are actually just moving in circles within the realm of failure.
Moving in circles within the realm of failure. It's a treadmill of deception. You're exhausted, you think you're climbing, but you're actually going nowhere. And eventually, you fall off.
Exactly.
And to bring all these concepts together, the earthly mundane reasoning, the sensual ego trap, the devilish deception, the author doesn't just leave us with theological theory. He provides a stark historical case study that proves, in his view, the absolute mechanics of how this earthly wisdom leads to emptiness.
Yes, this brings us to the final section of the excerpt, which I think is the most compelling piece of evidence he offers. But first, he grounds it in one final scripture, 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 6.
Let's read that. I've got it here. It's a short fragment, but it's really powerful. It says, the wisdom of this world which comes to naught.
Comes to naught. Let's explain what that actually means in this context, because it is the thesis of his historical example.
Right.
To come to naught means to amount to absolutely nothing, to equal zero. Total nullity, vanity, emptiness. The author is asserting that the ultimate, inevitable, mathematical destination of all earthly wisdom, no matter how grand, wealthy, or powerful it appears in the interim, is zero.
And to prove this concept of nullity, the author shares an excerpt from a book by A.L. Williams, which details that famous meeting we talked about at the very beginning of the deep dive, the meeting that took place in 1923.
Right, the meeting at Chicago's Edgewater Beach Hotel. In 1923, some of the most successful financiers and power brokers in the world gathered there. These men literally ruled the financial and industrial world of their era.
They really did.
They were the undisputed titans of industry.
Let's actually read off the names and positions of these men again, just so the listener truly understands the scale of their success at the time. This wasn't just a local Rotary Club meeting of successful small business owners.
No, these were the absolute giants of the 20th century. The author lists them out. Charles Schwab, the president of the largest independent steel company in America. Samuel Insull, president of the largest utility company. Howard Hobson, president of the largest gas company. Arthur Cutten, the greatest wheat speculator on earth. Richard Whitney, president of the New York Stock Exchange. Albert Fall, the secretary of the Interior in President Harding's cabinet.
A cabinet member.
Right. Jesse Livermore, the greatest bear on Wall Street. Ivar Kruger, head of the world's greatest monopoly. And Leon Fraser, president of the Bank of International Settlements.
Like we said, these were the tech billionaires, the oligarchs of the 1920s. These were the men that everyone envied. The men who had mastered the wisdom of this world to achieve absolute peak success, wealth, and power. If earthly wisdom works, it worked for them.
The author calls them movers and shakers, but then the text details the chilling outcome of these specific individuals just 25 years later. It's a stark, horrific contrast to their peak in 1923.
Yeah.
Let's look at what happened to them. Charles Schwab went bankrupt and lived his last 5 years on borrowed money. Samuel Insull died in a foreign land, a fugitive from justice, penniless. Howard Hobson went insane. Arthur Cutten became insolvent and died abroad. Richard Whitney had just been released from Sing Sing prison. Albert Fall had been pardoned from prison and died at home, broke. And then, most tragically, Jesse Livermore, Ivar Kruger, and Leon Fraser all committed suicide.
I mean, you read a list like that, and it literally takes your breath away. Bankruptcies, insanity, federal prison, suicide. The text uses this as the ultimate testament that success and money alone can't buy happiness and peace of mind. It came to naught.
It's zeroed out.
But I have to push back here. I have to play devil's advocate because I think a critical listener might hear this and think it's a bit of a cherry-picked example.
That's a fair point.
Wait, is the author saying that being successful in business automatically leads to ruin? Because I look at a guy like, say, Steve Jobs. He was notoriously cutthroat. He relied heavily on ego. He used what the author would call sensual earthly wisdom. He was famously harsh with employees.
Very true.
But he built the most valuable company on earth. He revolutionized human communication, and he died a billionaire with a massive, lasting legacy. How does the author reconcile that kind of lasting success with the idea that earthly wisdom always comes to naught? Does success equal sin?
That is exactly the right question to ask to test the boundaries of this framework. We have to look closely at the author's analysis to understand his true point. He is not saying that success itself is evil, or that business acumen guarantees ruin, or that building a valuable company is inherently sinful.
Okay, good.
What he is critiquing is the methodology and the source of the wisdom they use to achieve that success. He highlights a specific earthly slogan that governed these men. He writes that their philosophy was, just succeed anyhow.
Just succeed anyhow. The ends justify the means.
Yes. To the men in 1923, or at least to the archetype they represent in this text, how they won wasn't nearly as important as the act of winning itself. If they had to manipulate markets, defraud investors, ruin competitors, or leverage political corruption to get to the top, they did it.
They didn't care.
This perfectly encapsulates the earthly, sensual, and devilish wisdom. They used deception to gain unimaginable wealth, but because their foundation was out, of course, they lacked what the author calls inner peace, the ultimate human good.
So, addressing the Steve Jobs pushback, the text would argue that legacy or market cap isn't the metric of true success. Inner peace is.
Precisely. You can leave behind a trillion-dollar company, but if your life was categorized by bitter envying, strife, broken relationships, and a ruthless succeed-anyhow mentality, the author would argue that in the eternal or divine perspective, it still amounts to nullity.
Because the soul is bankrupt.
Yes. The men in 1923 built massive castles in the sky, and when gravity hit, when the Great Depression wiped out their wealth, when the law caught up with their frauds, when the emptiness of their sensual pursuits hollowed them out psychologically, they collapsed completely because they had no divine foundation to sustain them when the earthly metrics failed.
They gained the whole world, but lost their souls, essentially. And let's bring this into modern application. You see this exact dynamic playing out today with modern entrepreneurs, or even, like we talked about earlier, parents who adopt that succeed anyhow mentality.
You really do.
We culturally glorify the entrepreneur who sleeps under their desk, ignores their family, and ruthlessly crushes the competition to build a unicorn startup. But what happens when they cross the line and sacrifice their ethics to secure a round of funding?
Or inflate their user numbers.
Exactly. What happens when a parent sacrifices their marriage, their integrity, and their mental health to achieve a specific financial goal for the family, believing that the money will solve all their problems?
What happens is exactly what the author describes regarding the hedonists and the fame seekers. They reach the top of the mountain and find out they're utterly hollow inside. They feel exhausted. The worldly wisdom promised that wealth and success at all costs would bring contentment and security. But the frustration, the burnout, and the destruction experienced at the end is the ultimate proof, the nullity, that this is not sound wisdom. The malware eventually crashes the system. It came to naught.
It's an incredibly sobering reality check. It forces you to look in the mirror. So, let's pull all of this together. Let's synthesize the journey Pastor Jacob has taken us on today.
It's been a journey.
His text makes an incredibly compelling case that we absolutely cannot separate what we know from where that knowledge comes from. If you are operating on earthly wisdom, wisdom driven by mundane, selfish reasoning, sensual ego trips, and devilish motives like deception, backbiting, and hypocrisy, you might be able to build a temporary empire.
For a little while.
Right? You might get the advanced degree, the corner office, the fame, the followers, but you are building a castle in the sky. It lacks a true foundation, and ultimately, by the laws of spiritual gravity, it will come to naught.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it really serves as a vital, urgent audit for every single person listening. We have to look at our own lives.
We do.
We have to examine our business strategies, our family conflicts, our intellectual pursuits, and our ambitions, and honestly ask ourselves, what is the source of the wisdom I'm applying here? Is this financial decision driven by bitter envy and a desire for status? Is this career strategy relying on deception or a succeed-anyhow mentality?
Because if it is, the text warns us that the outcome is already written. The source of the wisdom dictates its final destination.
Exactly.
Which brings us right back to where we started. Remember those brilliant men at the Edgewater Beach Hotel? The smartest guys in the room whose lives fell apart. They weren't lacking intelligence. They were operating on a corrupted source code. They built on air, and they were at the mercy of gravity.
A tragic lesson.
So I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something that prepares us for the rest of the author's book. We've spent this entire time unpacking the vanity and corruption of earthly wisdom. The text warns us about the dangers of building a castle in the sky. But if we abandon earthly wisdom, what does it actually look like to build a life on a foundation that isn't bound by the Earth's gravity at all?
That's the real question.
If the earthly operating system is corrupt malware, how do we actually download and install that divine operating system? What does true divine wisdom actually look like when you apply it in the boardroom, in your marriage, and in your own mind? We'll see you next time as we explore the answer.